Welcome to the FloridaDefense.com podcast. With over 30 years of strong defense and over 30 years of even stronger results, with FloridaDefense.com, you'll never believe you can't win.
All right, welcome to the FloridaDefense.com podcast. We are speaking to Tampa Robbery Charges defense lawyer Mike Kinney. And Mike, we're going to be kind of going over, in the next series, just kind of going over theft crimes, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So you want to maybe just kind of give us an overview of the theft crimes, and then we'll kind of dive into robbery?
Well, sure. So there's, like you were mentioning, you call them kind of theft crimes, and these crimes that we're going to talk about all have to do with a taking of something from somebody else, whether it's a permanent taking or a temporary taking of some item. So, and depending on how the taking occurs or where the taking comes from, kind of changes the severity of the crime and the name of the crime. So a robbery, which is what we're going to talk about today, is essentially taking something from another person, but there's an added set of elements. There's this added set of elements of using force to take that item, or the threat of force. Now, the robbery statute in the state of Florida is under statute section 812.13, and it defines robbery. And it says it means the taking of money or other property, which may be the subject of larceny, which basically means theft, from the person or custody of another with the intent to either permanently or temporarily deprive the person or the owner of the money or other property when in the course of the taking there is the use of force, violence, assault, or putting in fear. That's the actual definition of robbery. Robbery has different levels. The most basic type of robbery is a third-degree robbery, and that's called a robbery by sudden snatching. And the name kind of implies that something's taken quickly from another individual. And the way that a person gets charged with a robbery by sudden snatching, the thing that I always kind of think about is a pickpocket. Pickpockets are kind of, I guess notorious. The people who are pickpockets notorious for being, pretty good about sneaking up behind somebody and taking something. There is no threat of violence. There is no force used. There really is no action on the part of the person other than the taking the item from the person. But a robbery from sudden snatching comes up when, in the course of that, either by snatching a purse from somebody or taking a wallet from somebody, the quote-unquote victim becomes aware at some point during the taking that something's being taken from them. So if a person were to go and, let's say a guy who's a purse snatcher, let's say he goes and kind of grabs a purse off of someone and begins to walk away. If he doesn't use any force to remove that purse, but maybe unclips the purse or somehow takes it from a person, and that person at some moment becomes aware that, oh my gosh, someone's taken my purse, at that moment, that transitions from a theft, what would normally be a theft, to a robbery by sudden snatching. Because there's no violence used, there's no force used. The only thing that happens is the person who's being victimized here realizes that he or she is the victim of a theft. And the legislature has decided that we're going to punish those crimes a little bit more seriously because obviously once a victim realizes he's being robbed from, everything can potentially escalate to another level. So that's a robbery by sudden snatching. It's a third-degree felony, and it's punishable by a maximum of 5 years in the Florida Department of Corrections. It doesn't score any type of mandatory prison sentencing, but you can get anywhere from probation to 5 years. Now, the next level, which is your probably the type of robbery that we hear about most often, is what's called a strong-arm robbery. That's a second-degree felony. And a strong-arm robbery is your basic definition of robbery, as how most people commonly understand it. And that is taking an item from some person by using force or threat of force. And this can come up in, the most common situation. A person is what we use the term mugged. A person is confronted by another individual, and that individual demands money. He can either use force and get into a fight and attack somebody and take that, and that's a robbery by sudden snatching. Or he can use a threat of force, saying, I'm going to harm you if you don't, give me this money. That's a second-degree felony, and that's punishable by up to 15 years in prison. You can get anything from probation to 15 years in prison for that. Then there's a next level from that, which things begin to change dramatically as far as the sentence. And that's if the person is armed. If in the course of committing the robbery, the offender carries a firearm or other deadly weapon, then the robbery is a felony of the first degree and is punishable by a term of imprisonment not exceeding life. So that's a punishable by life crime. So you take that same situation, you look at the three different robberies we talked about. A guy runs up and kind of snatches a purse off somebody, and that person doesn't become aware of it until he's running away. That could potentially be a robbery by sudden snatching. Then you graduate to another level where a guy walks up to somebody and says, "Hey, listen, give me your purse or I'm going to hit you." And the person gives the person the purse. That's a second-degree robbery. That's known as a strong-arm robbery. Then you get to this next level. A person points a firearm at someone and says, "Give me your purse." That crime is now punishable by life in prison. The first one punishable by 5 years, the second one punishable by 15, and obviously the third one punishable by life in prison. And that doesn't have to be a firearm. It could even be a knife. It could be a weapon of some sort. The firearm is still punishable by life, but it changes because there's a 10-20 life statute in Florida. Anytime a firearm is used in the commission of a felony, there's a 10-year minimum mandatory prison sentence.
Now, Mike, one thing I like about talking to you, and we've talked about this in the previous podcast, is that you've worked kind of both sides of the courtroom.
That's right.
The plaintiff side and also the defense side. Do you see very many of these being repeat offenders very often? And is there an additional, charge or imprisonment on repeat offenders?
Well, as a prosecutor, I've seen pretty much every type of crime you can imagine. Mm-hmm. Everything that from a misdemeanor to a capital murder. But as far as robberies are concerned, those are usually, in my experience as a prosecutor and a defense lawyer, those are usually crimes of desperation. Okay. And so you don't typically find that people do them regularly. Nobody's, unless we're talking about like a serial bank robber, which we may have run into those a couple of times. You usually don't find the same person just having a history of committing robberies. What I can tell you is that there are specific penalties, and Florida's pretty tough for people who get convicted of serious crimes and then get, basically when they come out, they're back in the system again. There's one specific, very simple enhancement called a prison releasee reoffender. And a person who's a prison releasee reoffender is anybody who gets sentenced to the Department of Corrections for anything. Say you go to prison for any type of charge whatsoever, but within 3 years of your release, you are convicted of committing a violent felony, basically a forcible felony. And that's anything like a robbery, a burglary, an arson, any kind of. There's kind of specific crimes known as forcible felonies, but these are specifically designated by statute. Okay. But if you commit these violent felonies or forcible felonies, you get the maximum sentence day for day. Wow. And the judge has no discretion as long as the state has served notice that you qualify for prison release reoffender. You get the maximum sentence day for day. So a person who may have gone to prison for something in the past and ends up committing an armed robbery, the judge, even if the judge wanted to, if you get convicted of an armed robbery, the judge has no discretion but to give you life.
Well, we've got a few other topics that we're going to discuss, so join us on our next edition of FloridaDefense.com podcast. We've been speaking to Tampa Robbery Charges defense attorney Mike Kinney.
Thank you for listening to the FloridaDefense.com podcast. Our firm has over 130 years of combined legal defense experience. Strong defense, stronger results. Consultations are free. Visit FloridaDefense.com today.